This
It
meeting is being recorded.
is a great honor to be joined by Alexander Booth. He is a writer, a critic, and a polemicist, and in his younger days, a dissident from the Soviet Union. How are you today, Alexander? Thank you for joining the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very well indeed. But when you talk about my dissident days in the Soviet Union,
Yeah,
you got to keep in mind that I left the country about 50 years ago.
right. We
So,
okay. We're going to refrain from talking about your
oh,
experience
you're welcome.
as much as possible.
Okay, but that's for me, that's sort of prehistoric, actually.
Yeah, certainly for me. Yeah, it is. I was born long after that place dissolved. But
Well, there you go.
yeah, so you told me in our email correspondence that you are residing in the United Kingdom now. Um, so a historical event or two happened this year. One that is the passing and the coronation of a new head of state, as well as the ascension of a new head of government, the prime minister and the king, respectively. So yeah, give us some thoughts and reflections on, I guess, that as a visitor.
Well, as a visitor to the UK, man.
Yeah, yeah, as a visitor
Well,
to UK, not a native-born person. I mean,
well, yeah, I'm a British subject and have been one for 35 years.
mm,
My wife is English, I don't think of myself as a visitor. I'm actually
okay, I see.
actually British, although, as you correctly remark, I wasn't born here. Well, the events are both extremely important and not so important because you see, Britain, theoretically speaking or ideally speaking, is governed by institutions and not persons.
Mhm.
And as long as the institutions are sound, the personalities of those who man them at this particular juncture of history should matter relatively little. But that's in theory. Theories are always wonderful and they're beautifully constructed, and except that in practice things work out differently, unfortunately or fortunately. The Queen, uh, and in general, people who are not British and who are not serious students of constitutional history underestimate the absolutely seminal role that the monarchy plays in our constitution. They say they notice correctly that the monarch has no executive power
Mhm.
as such, and then decide that the monarch is a purely ornamental figure, sort of part of a ye old England traveling show, rather than the vital constitutional vital constitutional element that he is, because the king first, the king is head not only of our state, but he's also the head of the Commonwealth, which was the new incarnation of the British Empire of old. Uh, as such, he's the critical figure in the coalescence of the Anglosphere.
Mhm.
Uh, the Anglosphere involves not only the members of the Commonwealth as they are today, but it also involves, of course, the United States, which used to be a colony here, and and that is the key nature of the so-called special relationship, which, by the way, I don't regard as being all that special, but uh, uh, but unfortunately, the traditional constitutional balance of England, which was the envy of the Western world, even of those people who themselves were not supporters of monarchy in general. For example, if you look at the great French political philosophers like Montesquieu, for example, I mean, they envied the British political dispensation because of the perfect balance of power that existed. There was the people's interests were represented in the Commons. That was on one end. On the other end, there was the monarch, the king, head of state, who also exercised quite a bit of power. And in between was the House of Lords, unelected House of Lords, that balanced the two ends of the seesaw to make sure that one of them didn't shoot up violently, if some kind of imbalance occurred. Now, and the essence of that was that neither the king nor the commons should have dominant power. And this it got to be all in balance. Now, after the glorious revolution of the 1680s, the power of the crown began to diminish dramatically, the executive power. And in the past 30, 40 years, the House of Lords has been debauched, basically, that especially during the administration of Tony Blair and his people, their animadversions centered on the unelected nature of the Lords. But the whole thing is that that's the whole point of the Lords. The whole point is that they're not elected and therefore not subject to political pressures. They're supposed to be, they derive from the ancient councils of elders that existed in all countries of the world, and even in the East, not just in Europe. And it was a council of elders, for example, that elected King Harold II, who was killed in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. So it goes back a very long time. Now that is being devastated. Hereditary lords are being kicked out, or their number greatly reduced. New lords are being appointed strictly as political favors, and there's more and more talk about an elected house. But in all that political chaos, suddenly even it's the personality of the monarch that became paramount. How the monarch, in this case, the Queen Elizabeth, how she managed to maneuver the way of the crown around all those obstacles, around all those through all those undercurrents of political rough and tumble, was very critical. And she did that with amazing dignity and amazing self-restraint, perhaps more self-restraint actually than the Constitution demands. Many of us, me included, kind of wished at times that she'd let us know what she thought about various political events. But she maintained that dignity, and she made people love her. And that is something I've never seen with any politician in any country I know at any time. Some politicians have been respected. Some politicians have even been venerated. Some were despised, some were hated, some were liked. But I can't think of a single one who was genuinely loved, because we like for something, we love in spite of everything. And that is the fundamental difference. Now, whether or not King Charles III will be loved in the same sense, I don't know.
Mhm.
and frankly, I doubt. For one thing, he is a much more active personality. As the Prince of Wales, he used to express views on all sorts of subjects, and much as it pains me to say so, much of his views were nonsensical. Specifically, he's obsessed with the environment and
Yeah.
global warming. And he talks to his plants, for example, because he thinks it makes them grow better. I mean, I've never seen a plant growing better because you talk to him. Although I've never tried to do so, I've sworn at some plants, but I don't think I ever tried to talk to them in a polite and loving manner. So at the same time, some of the things he has done as the Prince of Wales have been good. For
Mhm.
example, he led a campaign against modern architectural monstrosities that have been disfiguring London, and not only London, but just about every Western city, not just Western, by the way, looking at China, looking at Shanghai, places like that. And he's been campaigning against it relentlessly, and that campaign has done some good, not as much good as one would wish, but some. There are lots of reasonably decent buildings being built in London now. Fewer out and out monstrosities, although some are still being built. So some of the things he's done as the Prince of Wales have been good, but the jury is out. I mean, he hasn't been even crowned yet properly. I mean, he's acceded to the throne, but the coronation ceremony hasn't agreed. One thing that I was very happy about when he was the Prince of Wales. You know that the official title, one of the official titles of the English monarch is Defensor Fidei, the
Mhm.
defender of the faith.
Yes.
Uh, that that title was first granted to Henry VIII
Mhm.
uh, at the time when he was still a Catholic, because he wrote a tract, and a theological tract, and the Pope loved it so much that he got the title of Defensor Fidei. Having got it, he proceeded to destroy the Catholic Church in England, and to usher the Reformation in, which I regard as a destructive development, actually. But anyway, the defensor of the faith these days specifically means defender of the Anglican faith, of our established state religion. Now, Charles, when he was still the Prince of Wales, once said that, and actually, as you know, in England, the king is head not only of the state but also of the church. His official title is Supreme Governor of the Church. And by the church, they mean the Anglican Church, the Church of England. But he said, I will not be defender of the faith, but I'll be defender of faith,
Right.
meaning all faiths. And I wrote recently that his status of the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, I should think, would make it difficult for him to defend some animist cults of Africa, or for that matter, any other religion, or even any other Christian confession. So I feared that when he acceded, he would stick to that particular subversive nonsense, actually, but he didn't. In his very first speech, he said that I shall be defender of the faith. faith, and that little article, that definite article "the" in that sentence makes all the difference. So we don't know. As to the prime minister, well, we've had disastrous prime ministers for since the time of Margaret Thatcher, and even though I'm not an unequivocal admirer of Mrs. Thatcher, she was definitely a force to be reckoned with. She was a statesman
Mhm.
of a serious caliber. We haven't had a single one since then, and the Conservative Party has lost in the interim, has lost any sensible claim to being conservative in any sense of the word,
Yeah, I agree.
other
I agree.
other than other than the name of the party, which means nothing. For
Mhm.
example, when David Cameron became prime minister, he said that the very essence of his view of the world can be described in three letters: NHS. Now, NHS stands for the National Health Service, and we can argue till the cows come home about the merits and demerits of nationalized medicine, and I'm a huge opponent of it, both in theory because I don't like socialism, but especially in practice because it clearly doesn't work. Our new health secretary said that her dream is that one day people would not have to wait for more than a fortnight for a doctor appointment. It means that now they have to wait for longer than 2 weeks to
Mhm.
see a doctor. What if you're bleeding rather fast? I mean, what happens then? Anyway, but say what you will about the NHS, about the merits and demerits of the NHS. One thing it certainly isn't is a conservative enterprise. It's a stark example of socialism at work. The NHS is already the biggest employer in Europe,
Right.
and as its staff grows exponentially, the proportion of of frontline medical people, of doctors and nurses, is going down.
Hmm.
The staff growth is usually due to the massive influx of directors of diversity, of optimizers of facilitation, facilitators of optimization, of administrators of this or that. And that is the nature of any massive socialist bureaucracy. I mean, before long, it stops serving the people it's supposed to serve and starts serving itself. And well, a prime example, a very close friend of mine is an NHS doctor. He works at the hospital, and a few months ago, his hospital cut 10% of the beds
Hmm.
because they had no funds. At exactly the same time, they hired a chap with the title of Director of Diversity,
Oh boy.
paying him £120,000 a year. And I don't know how many hospital beds can be put up for that kind of money, but quite a few, I dare say. And he started issuing illiterate memos to justify his existence. For example, he said, you must be sensitive to the religious sensibilities of your patients. For example, he said, we have quite a few patients born in the Congo, and you must realize that Islam is the primary religion of the Congo. Now, that, I'm afraid, is ignorance, because the primary religion in the Congo is Catholicism.
Mhm.
The second religion is the local animistic kind of religion, and Islam is a very distant third.
Hmm.
So that's what's going on in the chat. in the NHS, but the NHS has become more than just a health service. It has become a bull's head sitting on top of a totem pole. It's become a deity of sorts, worshipped by the British, who have been corrupted into thinking that there's some kind of moral high ground that the NHS occupies. Now, the point of any health service is, I would have thought, is to provide health services, to treat people. I mean, and how it's financed should be secondary to the main purpose, and third, assessed strictly on efficacy. Because there are all sorts of, and that's what people refuse to understand. They refuse to understand that financing the NHS out of the public treasury, out of the exchequer, is only one. First, it's only a method of finance. It's not a moral statement. It's not a philosophical statement. It's just a way of pumping money into the organization. And they spread all sorts of myths about it. They say the NHS is the envy of the world. Now, I haven't noticed that. I've been to quite a few places in the world, and I spent half my time in France, where they have, as in most places in Europe, they have a mixed system, private and state, which works infinitely better than the NHS. And the French don't make far-reaching moral and almost religious statements about their health service anyway. So that's Cameron. One thing he was especially proud of when he finally left office. He said his main achievement was legalizing homosexual marriage. Again, we can argue about this, but what's unarguable is that this has nothing to do with conservatism. I mean, homosexual marriage may be wonderful if one is so inclined, but for a government to pursue it doesn't brand it as a conservative government.
Right.
And so on. So in comes Liz Truss and her chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, who immediately introduced some fiscal reform, some economic reform. And they obviously are a very firm believer in supply side economics, and sort of they are the students of Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and von Mises and people like that. As am I to some extent, but only to some extent. Again, this is not conservative because this sort of thought is classic liberal. It comes from in Britain. It comes from the Whig tradition rather than from the Tory tradition. Of course, it was the Whig who campaigned in the 19th century for freer markets, for liberating the trade. They were the ones who repealed the Corn Laws, which started this massive expansion of the British economy in the 19th century. Again, I hope that the economic ideas will succeed, but I must say they are doing certain things that run contrary to common sense. For example, they're increasing borrowing at a time when interest rates are going up, which means that the price of every borrowed pound is going up. And we're already paying about 100 billion pounds a year to service the existing sovereign debt, just in interest payments. They're going to double it within a year. So before too long, I mean, the entire budget of the United Kingdom will be used to pay interest on the existing debt. I'm exaggerating slightly, of course, but that seems to be the tendency. As to, but again, they're also lowering taxes, or rather, how shall I put it? They're preventing them from being raised. For example, the previous administration declared that they're going to increase the corporate tax rate, which is a suicidal measure, of course, because if you start increasing corporate taxes, fewer corporations will want to do business, and fewer foreign corporations will want to come in, and so they're reversing that. I mean, Truss declared, Quartang declared that they're going to reverse that. But taxes in modern socialist democratic economies, which is basically all Western economies, I mean, whatever they call themselves, they're in fact social democratic, of course. Taxes are not just about the economy, and they're not just about money. Taxes are punitive because they appeal to the people's envious craving for revenge, because taxes are a way of being nasty to rich people,
Right.
and the population at large, if it has been bombarded with leftist propaganda for decades, seems to believe that that a rich person can become rich only at the expense of somebody else becoming poor, which is essentially a Marxist view of zero-sum economics, where they perceive the economy as a pie whose size never changes. And if I get a bigger slice of the pie, your slice will become smaller, and vice versa. But of course, that goes against common sense first, and against serious economics second, because the size of the pie can grow, and 10% of 100 is more than 100% of 5. So it's but the British public has been corrupted in that sense, and that's why the Labour Party conference is underway, and they're attacking all these reforms, saying they favor only the rich. But of course, the classical economic view is trickle down, that when the rich amass their wealth, a lot of it trickles down because they invest their money. They're going to put the money under the mattress. They're going to buy shares. They're going to buy securities. They're going to pump money into the economy. But that point of view is relatively easy to understand intellectually, but unfortunately rather hard to accept emotionally for many people. And people are not always and never merely rational. A lot of their perceptions, a lot of their views spring from their feelings. If you're a student of the English language, and you must know that these days people used to say, "I think that." Now the most popular phrase is, "I feel that."
Right.
People no longer think; they feel. We used to have great thinkers. Now we have great feelers. And anyway, so we'll wait and see. I mean, the new prime minister, the new government, and the new king have come in at roughly the same time. In fact, the last act of the Queen in her life was to accept the credentials of Liz Truss after she won the leadership contest of the Tory party and became prime minister. So it's hard to tell. And but one little detail about that proves the idea that that the left see taxes as a punitive measure rather than a fiscal measure.
Mhm.
Keir Starmer, who is head of the opposition,
Labor.
is
Yeah, the Labor.
Labour. He delivered a speech at the conference, and because the Tories have lowered the top income tax bracket from 45% to 40%, which is still ridiculously high. But anyway, but he said that the first thing that Labour will do once they've returned to power, they'll restore the 45% rate.
Hmm.
That promise, for me, missed one tiny conditional clause. He didn't say if the lower rate has been proved unsuccessful. What he's saying is that even if the lower rate stimulates the economy, produces growth, and the economy is doing very well, he'll still go back to the old rate for purely ideological reasons. And when an ideology rears its head, things are never good. And I don't care what kind of ideology it is. There's no such thing as a good ideology.
Hmm.
Left, right, extreme this, extreme that. Whenever people start thinking ideologically rather than philosophically and pragmatically, they commit a crime against sensibility. And so we'll see. We'll see what's going on. If we talk about it in 6 months, I may be saying very different things.
Mhm. Right. So I'd like to touch on how different the way British conservatism as well as is compared to American conservatism. I view myself as a student of the American conservative tradition, which you point out correctly that it is derived from the British Whig tradition. And so, having familiarized yourself with both, what would you say are the key differences between those two traditions?
And we're talking about political conservatism.
Yes, political conservatism.
Because cultural conservatism is the same everywhere, basically throughout the West.
Yeah.
Political conservatism, for me, the biggest difference between British political conservatism and American political conservatism is that the latter doesn't exist and cannot exist because conservatism has to be defined by the answer one gives to a very simple question. What is it that you propose to conserve? Kind of a logic. I'm trying to stay within the narrow confines of logic here. And the term conservative, liberal, or all the modern political lexicon derives from the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
Derives from the 18th century, as do things like right and left, as you know, the National Assembly in France. The Girondists, the royalists, were on the right of the aisle, and the Jacobins, the revolutionaries, were on the left. So it goes back to that. Now, the difference between conservatism and conservatives and not conservatives is defined by how they view the Enlightenment and how they assess and incorporate the legacy of the Enlightenment. Now, a conservative to me is someone who rejects the ideas of the Enlightenment lock, stock, and barrel, wholesale. whereas the opposite of conservatives, whatever they're called in different countries, is somebody who accepts the ideas of the Enlightenment and the political ideas of the Enlightenment are a complete destruction of traditional structures, democracy run riot, systematic expansion of suffrage of the franchise, both horizontally in drawing in greater swathes of the population, and vertically in terms of decreasing their age, and and above all the never-ending budgeting of the central state, the absolutely inevitable consequence of Enlightenment ideas is political centralism, which runs contrary to traditional European politics of localism. So if you look at the United States was the first country in history constituted and founded on Enlightenment principles. And if you read the Declaration of Independence, it's an Enlightenment document from in every word, including and but, and the French Revolution, actually, which is usually mentioned in that context, was a direct consequence of the American Revolution, even as French Enlightenment ideas had inspired the American Revolution in the first place. And so if you look at things like life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, incidentally, the founding fathers of the United States, some of the critical ones, understood it very well post factum. For example, John Adams wrote in 1811, I believe. He said, "Didn't the American Revolution beget the French Revolution, and didn't the French Revolution beget every misery in the world?" And that was written by John Adams, America's second president. And he wrote quite a few other things. He also said another critical thing. He said, "We thought we were creating a republic, but to my horror, I realized we'd created a democracy." And that's John Adams speaking, not dyed-in-the-wool conservative, Jefferson also said that defined democracy as one half of the population taking away the rights of the other half, so on and so forth. So when you look at British conservatives and you say, and if you ask them what is it that you wish to conserve, then they can use this old tired slogan of God, King, and country in that order. And that describes the nature of British Toryism to a T. When you look at American conservatives in the same sense, what is it they want to conserve? Pursuit of happiness, universal franchise, the Constitution of the United States, which is a very nebulous document, really. Which is why, for example, the English Tory tradition had absolutely no influence on American conservatism. American conservatism, their guiding star is Edmund Burke, who was a great Whig and actually a great political thinker. His reflections on the revolution in France should be a mandatory text in every high school, not just a university. But he was a Whig. And it's very interesting how, and the principal Tory at that time in England in the late 18th century was Dr. Johnson, Dr. Samuel Johnson. And it's interesting to see how they responded to the American Revolution in diametrically opposite ways. Burke, who detested the French Revolution, welcomed the American one. He said it's a revolution not made but prevented, he said, and all that. Whereas Dr. Johnson said, how is it that the loudest yelps for liberty are coming from the drivers of Negroes? And so American conservatism cannot possibly exist in the same sense in which French conservatism can't possibly exist for the same reasons. Because in France, a conservative is a half crazy chap who wants the restoration of the Bourbons, and he's not taken seriously by anybody. In America, even that doesn't exist. You know, they're not going to. So political conservatism, as I define it, is impossible. So Americans have surrogate conservatisms. Specifically, they begin to equate conservatism with libertarianism, with economic libertarianism. And if you read the great American conservative thinkers like Russell Kirk or people of that nature, they struggled with that. You know, they themselves were intuitively very conservative people, but they couldn't find a truly conservative basis. And that also explains the appearance of this ugly political trend of neoconservatism, which I think is especially destructive, and not just for America. I actually wrote a book about neoconservatism, democracy as a neocon trick. But well, neoconservatism is actually non-conservatism. I mean, their principal domestic ideas are sort of European social democratic. They're welfareists. If you read the great, Crystal, their founding father,
Irving Kristol,
of neoconservatism, if you read his books, they're written by, in British terms, a Labour politician of the 1950s. Mm-hmm. They're not written by a conservative. Where they differ from from the Democratic Party, which is becoming exceedingly socialist, which it wasn't when I lived in America, not to the same extent. But if you look at how they differ, it's mainly the proselytism of America and American expansionism and American exceptionalism. They marry socialism with nationalism, which is not a combination that enjoys a lovely reputation in recent history. So, in my view, political conservatism, qua conservatism, doesn't exist in America. I have American friends, obviously, and I meet Americans at various functions, conservative Americans. I don't talk to other people, but anyway, you hear the same thing all over again. They attach a much greater importance to economic matters than do British conservatives. They say, well, you free up the markets and everything else will follow. Well, no, not exactly, I'm afraid. Free trade and free markets are extremely important, and they are more effective in producing wealth than anything else. But life is not all about wealth. And life as a society is glued together not just by money, but also by shared tradition, by shared values, by a strong social fabric, and things like that. And a free economy is a wonderful thing, provided it's handled with sensitivity. For example, Margaret Thatcher inherited the country in disarray when Britain was called the sick man of Europe at that time. There was strikes and all that. So she busted the unions, which is a good thing. I personally, if I were God Almighty and dictator of the world, I would ban trade unions in Western countries, because they're an anachronism going back to the time of the Industrial Revolution, when they were indeed necessary. But they're just subversive now. But anyway, she busted the unions, pinned down their tails a bit, and she got rid of the muscle industries. She got rid of steel. She got rid of coal. She got all those, old muscle-based industries were outsourced to other countries, Brazil, whatever. Fine. Any modern economist will tell you it's a wonderful thing, except suddenly we got millions of people who used to work in the mines, who used to work in the steel mills, who used to work in places like that. What's going to happen to them? Are they all going to become systems analysts, IT consultants, or stockbrokers? They're not, are they? They're going to go on welfare. They're going to go on social assistance, and they will become resentful, and the social cohesion of those areas where they lived in England, it's mostly the north of the country, will be ripped to tatters. Now, a good thing, but it was done too fast. It was done too fast and without due attention to attendant developments. Margaret Thatcher, of course, was also very Whiggish. Margaret Thatcher, again, was not a real Tory. She was an out and out Whig, and there's nothing wrong with that. But with elements of Whiggery, and because free markets are exceptionally important, and conservatives recognize that. But conservatives don't believe that the economy is the be-all and end-all of life. And another thing, of course, is the collapse of the Christian consciousness in the West, because our civilization is Christian. That doesn't mean that it hasn't had other inputs. Obviously, it has had it. In fact, I always refer to Christendom as an asset-stripping civilization. It's like, for example, the entire philosophical apparatus of Christendom came from Greece, of course. It came from Athens, and but as a philosopher once said, he said, Aquinas baptized Aristotle, meaning that Aristotle became part of the Christian tradition. That he didn't come into our consciousness unvarnished. He was diluted with certain other things. But anyway, that was the foundation of culture. It was the foundation of politics. Because if you look at medieval politics in Europe, they reflect the structure of the church. The combination of solidarity, and we're all people together, and localism, where the power is devolved to the lowest sensible level. That was gone. In fact, the Enlightenment, if it can be described in very simple terms, the Enlightenment was a mass revolt against Christianity in Europe. And not just about religion as such, but against the civilization produced by the religion in its every cultural, political, ethical, moral, and legal manifestation. So that so what has come instead of it? What has replaced it? I mean, a society, in order to be successful, requires some sort of adhesive agent, something that binds it together. In England, for example, in the absence of religion as a principal dynamic, it's the Queen who acted in that capacity. She was the one who brought all British people together. But I say all is a big word, but a general consensus was built on her and on the institution of monarchy. And that, by the way, is the absolutely invaluable and possibly the most important function of our monarchy. That's social cohesion that produces. Take that away, and what have we got? What Kennedy's idea of 2 cars in every garage and 2 chickens in every pot, or the European desire for 8-week holidays. All those things are wonderful, but for me, they fall short of being a philosophical foundation of successful society. So I think the West is in crisis, of course, and I think, personally, being a rather pessimistic person by nature, I rather think the crisis is irreversible. But acting as Cassandra actually runs the risk of suffering Cassandra's fate. Nobody believes her. I don't see. I've written 1,000. I've written 1,000 times, if I've written it once, that the only thing that can bring the West back to life is a major catastrophe, is a major cataclysm, either military or economic or both. And we can see little hints of that today. Because if you look at, for example, NATO, before the 24th of February this year, when Putin attacked the Ukraine, and after, you're looking at 2 different entities. Before, they were people were saying, well, what do we need a NATO for? I mean, nobody's threatening us. Trump, one of the first things he said when he became president, even before he became president, he said, NATO has outlived its importance and all that. Suddenly, look at NATO now. NATO suddenly is beginning to speak in one voice, and we have Putin to thank for it. Even though I always say, yes, a catastrophe of some kind can bring us together, but only a madman would wish for that to happen. We don't want thermonuclear war to revive Christianity or to revive Western polity. But if that happens, that very well might be the effect.
Right. Of course, I had a lot of things to disagree about in that very long remark of yours, but it is worth considering. I think one especially is your criticisms of neoconservatism as a movement. Although there, I'm sure you've get a lot of, I guess, pushback from that from your son Max, who I think is associated with the neocon movement of now.
He was. He,
Okay.
he's now become an out and out left winger.
Yeah, I have to admit that as well. But nevertheless, it is a very uncommon line of criticism directed at the neoconservatives, because the common one being from lefties who believe that Bush and his neocon advisors bungled the Iraq War and such. But I'd like to move on uh, from that and ask another question. You mentioned in our email exchange that you considered a great thinker to be one who had great thoughts. Of course, you didn't mention whether or not you agree with them. So here's my question. Who would you consider to be a great thinker whom you disagree with the most?
Well, that's a tricky one, isn't it? You see, my natural mental makeup is such that if I disagree with a thing, I don't consider him great. But that's an interesting question. Well, I can tell you, oh God. Well, I can't think of anybody. I can, when I say disagree with, if you mean disagree in particulars, I could keep you till tomorrow morning just naming names of people with whose general view of the world I agree, but diverge from them in certain details.
Yeah.
But maybe if you mean a thinker whose whole view on the world I find unacceptable, then by definition I can't regard him as a great thinker. But for example, Edmund Burke, for example, whom I regard as possibly the greatest political thinker of all time, or certainly right up there in the top tier. I emphatically disagree with his views of the American Revolution. Fundamentally, on them in every particular, but nonetheless, I regard him as a great political thinker. I read, for example, Friedrich Hayek, let's say, whom I find to be, without question, a great thinker on economic matters. But I disagree with him on the kind of importance he attaches to economics, which for him is basically the be all and end all. And for me, it's only one strain that feeds the pool of our culture and civilization. So so there are quite a few great thinkers, but I don't see any of them among the neocons. I don't even see average thinkers among the neocons. I think it's a pernicious political trend encapsulating the worst that there is in American political thought. And it's very interesting that well, you mentioned Max. Max and I are not on speaking terms and haven't been for a very long time. But his evolution is very typical of a neocon. They're impassioned people. I mean, they everything is at hysterical pitch. You watch Max on television, he's on the verge of a hysterical fit at all time. And Trump, who challenged all their precepts, became the object of fervent hatred for them. I'm not there, by the way, I'm very far from being an admirer of Donald Trump. But my criticism of Trump is from a different direction. I find him to be a barbarian, basically a savage, and I don't think who can't put together a single grammatical sentence in English for all his expensive education and all that. And I don't think a conservative, to me, is described not so much by his ideas, but by his temperament, his tastes, and his style. As Georges Buffon said, le style c'est l'homme même. I mean, the style is the man himself. And Trump's style puts him beyond the pale as far as I'm concerned. I don't see him as a fellow conservative anyway. But he did challenge the neocons. And that produced an outburst of emotional, visceral hatred. You know, and many of them, including Max, after that, after the appearance of Trump, naturally moved all the way to the left, right into the mainstream of today's Democratic Party, which is, by the way, profoundly different from the Democratic Party, even from the time when I lived there. I left America, what, in 88, 87, 87. At that time, I mean, the difference was there. There were Republicans, there were Democrats, but let's say the left half of the Republicans and the right half of the Democrats were identical in their politics. And in general, there was some kind of modicum of mutual, if not respect, at least civility. Now that has disappeared. Now one sees this tremendous polarization and this tremendous animosity when the two halves are going at one another, hammer and tongs. And as the neoconservatism, all I, like I suggested that you read my book on that subject, but I do regard it as the distillation of the worst traits of American politics. Actually, it's a combination of this crusading American proselytism with wokery and with this politically correct view of history. Actually, so it's not my favorite political trend. But as I say, people with conservative inclinations in America really don't have that many places to go. I mean, it's either neoconservatism or basically libertarianism. That's sort of it. They can't be conservatives in the God, King, and country sense of British Toryism. Because if you look at that triad, they've eliminated the third part of it. They've downgraded the middle part, God, to the level of a quaint personal preference. And they deified the country. America for them is God. And I don't think any country should be used in that capacity. Only God is God. That's essentially my view.
Yeah, so final question, since we are unfortunately running out of time. It's past an hour already, but you and I being both, I guess, what you'd call it, not born in the Western civilization manner, but have come to appreciate it. I guess my definition of the Western civilization tradition runs a bit further than yours, because I include both the Greco-Roman tradition as well as the Judeo-Christian and the Enlightenment tradition in it, but I disregard the post-Enlightenment philosophical thought. The fact that they happen to be Western is merely contingent. So, but nevertheless, we share one thing in common in that we both see that the idea of Western civilization has come under severe and relentless assault. rhetorically at first, and and then there are the toppling of statues. So how would you convince a person, preferably my age, I guess, who is convinced that Western civilization is not worth saving, that, well, otherwise the contrary
I
opinion?
can't. I,
Mhm.
I don't think it's a task that's possible to approach from that end, because the starting point would be to drag our education and our media from the clutches of people who hate our civilization, because the media throughout the Western world are predominantly anti-Western, as I define the word Western, meaning against our civilization and against its legacy, against its founding principles, and especially education. The West has suffered an educational catastrophe in the past 50 years, or longer. I mean, America is the prime example. I mean, you talk to a chap. I lived in Texas for 10 years. You talk to a regular man in a bar, and I like them. You see, they're lovely people and all that. But the moment they start talking about things outside what kind of beer they prefer or what kind of car, God, this is awful. I mean, they don't know the difference between Sweden and Switzerland or Austria and Australia. And I knew people living in villages 30 miles from Houston who'd never been even in Houston, never mind anywhere else. This tremendous cultural parochialism. And of course, such people are very easy prey when they go to school and when they're told that the entire Western civilization is a contiguous history of violence towards minorities, of colonialism, of whatever. They don't have any kind of intellectual apparatus to activate in opposition. So unless that changes, I don't see how things can change. If you look, for example, at teachers training colleges in the UK, the people who graduate from them and then get to teach our children are indescribably stupid and ignorant. They know nothing. They know absolutely nothing. Well, unfortunately, my example from my own family, my niece, rather, my wife's niece, has a degree in philosophy from Leeds University. So she's a philosopher. She's the philosopher in the family. Well, after she got her degree in philosophy, she in the casual conversation, she couldn't quite place Schopenhauer's name.
Mm.
She didn't know who Schopenhauer was. Well, it's sort of like a conservatoire graduate, not knowing who Beethoven was. It's. Let me ask you a question. Your podcast is called
Yes.
Musically Speaking,
Yes.
and yet we didn't speak musically, because this is one of my favorite subjects, actually.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, well, it's a shame, but well, we can do it in another podcast setting, because well, the initially it was a music-based podcast, but over time I expanded to talk about socio-political matters. But I still maintain the music angle of it.
well, I one of the people who interview me regularly insisted a few years ago that I put my pieces on Facebook.
Mm, mm,
And on Facebook, people can befriend you or unfriend you.
yes.
And uh, and I've been unfriended, I don't know, by 20 or 30 people in the time that I've had it. And I would say that about 90% of those unfriended me because they disagreed with my views on music,
Mm.
rather than politics or philosophy or religion or whatever. I mean, I remember I described Barenboim as a dull pianist, and I immediately lost several friends, and well, that's another major cultural catastrophe in the West, that a musical performance is not appreciated anymore. I mean, if you look at the kind of, I looked at the concert programs of London concert halls in the 50s, and if you compare them to what goes on now, for example, in one season, Furtwängler conducted all Beethoven symphonies in one season, and he is the greatest conductor who's ever lived. I don't think at the moment we have a single conductor capable of conducting a Beethoven symphony in any kind of recognizable fashion. And it's an absolute catastrophe what happened in the musical world. I mean, musicians are packaged and marketed as like pop stars rather than like serious artists in touch with the greatest cultural achievement of our civilization. Actually, it's quintessential expression. I mean, if the artistic expression of the Greek and Roman culture was mainly sculpture, and for us, it's music. It's music because it provides a direct link to the transcendent, and that is the nature of our civilization, and that's completely lost. But we have one composer of genius living in England now, or rather in Scotland, James Macmillan. Do you know his work?
No, but I should check him out.
You should. His 100 years from now, his name will be mentioned side by side with Bach's. This is an absolute genius. But the situation in general is dire. But that's for the next time, isn't it?
Yes, I would love to invite you again to discuss music, particularly classical, since I was not trained in the classical music tradition.
I don't know any.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
But nevertheless, it would be a great conversation to have. But yeah, on that note.
Yeah, on that note, yes.
On that note, thank you very much, Mr. Alexander Booth, writer, critic, polemicist, and a professor of controversial opinions. Thank you very much again for appearing on this program. I wish you a lovely day over there at the United Kingdom, and take care of yourself. God bless.
And you too. Bye-bye.